So, a couple of days ago, I stood at the kitchen bench waiting for the kettle to boil, as I do maybe 3 or 4 times a day, waiting to make a cup of tea. And I glanced to the side, and there in the corner of the kitchen bench behind the coffee machine sits an empty red wine bottle with the cork in the top. And I see it every day, 3 or 4 times a day. But this particular morning I looked at it again and I thought, that bottle will never get thrown out. It's a symbol of basically of my husband's reaction, his silent feeling, I guess. The fact that it still sits there is because of my husband. But I was transported back 11 and a half years ago. And I looked at that red wine bottle and I thought, how and why? I went back to that Sunday morning and the phone call from our daughter. Do you know where Luke is? No, we're in Ocean Grove, we're on our way back. You're at home, where's he? I don't know, she said. I've rung a couple of his friends, and that's odd because you would think he'd be at their place if he's not at home. So uneasiness set in. I thought, that's not quite Luke's way of operating. What's going on? We drove home, walked into the kitchen. The kitchen was spotless. That's, again, unusual. A bottle of the red wine, this particular bottle, was sitting there half empty with the cork carefully placed back in, and the bottle sat on the bench. I opened the fridge. In the fridge was a container, plastic container, with leftover spaghetti bolognese sauce. I thought, I didn't make that before I left. Oh, Luke's made himself spaghetti bolognese yesterday afternoon. There you go. He's used the red wine in the spaghetti sauce. He's had himself a meal of spaghetti bolognese and a glass of red wine from his father's stash under the house. And he's nowhere to be seen. His bed's perfectly made. This is not right. What's going on? I thought, how and why? How and why do you do all of this? You go shopping for the minced steak, you cook yourself your favourite meal, when you know your plan that night is to walk down the street and step in front of a train. How does that mind work? And I guess when you transport yourself back to that mind and that mind state, it does somehow explain the depth of mental illness that you could behave like that you could behave perfectly normally, that you could speak to your sister's friends, you could refuse to come and sit and have a chat and have a drink with them, but you could then, after they go out, sit on your own and have your last meal, and then wait, all carefully planned, wait till the last train because you wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone by causing, a stoppage on the train line. So you'd wait till the last train, and then you just go and do what you did. And I was just standing there waiting for the kettle to boil, thinking all this, and just once again, like 11 and a half years ago, and still you're transported back as though it was yesterday, and your feelings erupt again. How could a person think like that? We'll never know, we'll never understand. And it's taken me a long time to come to terms with that fact that we'll never truly know, we'll never truly understand. And to be able to live with that has been huge. but somehow, in some way, time and all the things you do in that time enables that to happen. So looking back, it's still quite surreal. And then I think, how the hell did we cope with it? How did we do it? And at the same time, how have we managed to survive? I really don't know. And to say that nothing could prepare you for it is just a huge understatement. And that's just so true. So nothing could have prepared two loving parents, two loving older brothers, and a loving younger sister. Not to mention grandparents, uncles, aunties, cousins, a huge, beautiful family who adored Luke and who he adored. An enormous group of friends, just an amazing group of boys and girls. Everybody loved him. So how can you lose your 21-year-old son? There's absolutely no way you could ever prepare yourself to cope with such a thing, especially when it comes out of the blue. It's just a total shock. Nothing prepares you for the time, the weeks, the months, the years to follow. It's just a total change in your life. It's like there's life before it happened and there's life after it happened. It's not just the incredible pain of the loss at the time. For me, a huge, incredible amount of it was the guilt. The guilt as a mum, and I know as a dad too, that you could or should have done something. The feeling that your love wasn't enough, or even more than that, the feeling that they didn't know you loved them. You can't have expressed your love. You mustn't have done, and you mustn't have showed him that you loved him. And then that goes to your other kids. Well, maybe you haven't shown any of them that you loved them. So there's this constant questioning. It's just relentless, the self-questioning, the self-doubt, and then what I would call loss of identity as a mother and a father. Like you're no longer the mother you thought you were. You're no longer the father you thought you were. It's not just feelings of guilt and inadequacy for the one you've lost. It's all sorts of parenting situations relating to all your children growing up. So you question everything. And that doesn't just stay then at the time. That goes on, and things are triggered off at all sorts of different times, and you don't know when that's going to happen. And you'll go into that dark space again. And sometimes you go into that dark space again and you think, am I going to come out of it this time? When will I come out of it? How will I get out of it? And one of the things I've learnt is that you have to go back to look at what you did at the time and what you did at other times when you felt you're in that dark space. So you're relying on how you got out of that space in the past, and somehow or other you have to keep inside that thought that you will get out of it again, and that you have to use your strategies that you've used before. I think I'd have to say that suicide of someone close to you has a pain and a grief all of its own. And unless you've experienced it, you're probably never going to truly understand the depth of it. It's incredibly deep, it's incredibly complicated, multi-layered, and far-reaching into the lives of family members and friends. So how did I get to this point, 11 and a half years down the track? A very different person to what I was 11 years ago. We were an average family in the suburbs, public servant dad, school teacher mum, 4 children, 3 boys that had all been to secondary education at Parade College, at Bundoora. Our daughter completed hers at Catholic Ladies College in Eltham, and life was pretty good. We thought the hard work of raising 4 kids was pretty much done. They were all young adults now. We could have adult family dinners. The teenage years were over. We thought all the tricky stuff was complete. The two older boys had completed their tertiary studies and they travelled and worked overseas. So, all the good things. Completed all the rites of passage that teenagers go through. We'd got them through all that. So, we were thinking we'd done a pretty good job. We thought we were pretty okay parents. Our second son had a partner and a little baby boy all of his own by now. He was only 1 year old. And then there was Luke, number 3 son. He was at university, working part-time. He was the real fun-loving of all the kids. He was the one who thought he was a bit of an amateur comedian. He liked to keep everybody happy in the family, the little kids, the cousins, just everybody. He was the behind-the-scene comedian. He thought he could model himself on a bit of Jerry Seinfeld, Dave Hughes, Ricky Gervais. They were all his heroes. It could be any one of those at any time. Everybody loved him, as I said before, not the least his sister, who was about a year younger than him. She was number 4. They were like a pair of twins. He'd do absolutely anything for her. He'd give her anything. He'd rescue her from any situation. He was like the glue in the family. He really was the centrepiece between the 2 older boys, the younger sister. He just appeared to have it all. But there was some things going on behind the scenes we were starting to become aware of. I guess it was mid-2004 and we were planning to celebrate his 21st birthday. So he'd been to, all the boys' all the mates' 21st, the girls' 21st. It was just that scene. And we just imagined he'd want a big party with a huge circle of friends, the family, everybody there. We thought that'd be exactly what he wanted. But then, he started to seem a bit unsure about all that, which really freaked us out a bit. But anyway, we continued on. We found a venue and he seemed to be okay with that, but not over the moon about it, not his usual chatty, witty self. And I thought, maybe he doesn't actually like to be the centre of attention, which surprised me. But and then I thought he's doing this because he thinks that's what's expected, that the family will expect it, his friends will expect it. So that's when I actually noticed that things were not quite right. That was the first inkling, really. And there were many moments over the next 6 months, I suppose, and that's all it was. So from that first inkling we had, it's only 6 months until he took his own life, which is a pretty short time, really, and not a lot of... and it's just not something you ever thought would happen. Even though we thought there was some anxiety there, there's no way known we ever would have thought that he would do what he did. It's just still incomprehensible. So we celebrated his 21st birthday, but things seemed to get less and less right. Anxiety was starting to creep in more and more and take over. He stayed home more and more, and that was not his scene either. He saw less and less of his friends, so that was really unusual. And he was just opting out of things in many ways. So I thought he needs to see someone. So he went to a counsellor through our local GP. He also went to a counsellor at the university. And I thought, that's, that's all sort of pretty good. He also... He decided to start taking some antidepressants. And that was only about 6 weeks before he then decided to opt out altogether. In his mind, he thought we'd all be better off without him. And that was the depth of his depression. So to go from this boy who everybody adored to think that he thought we'd all be better off without him is just... It still doesn't make sense. It never will. So shock reverberated really through the whole community, and it did feel like that. It wasn't just his family and his huge family and his huge group of friends. It was just everybody. Nobody could believe it. People rallied around us from everywhere. They supported us in every way. Then we had to get through a funeral. So about 1 week later, after he died, there we stood. I remember it was about 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to get ready to go to your son's funeral. Trying to put makeup on or something. And I remember just looking in the mirror and just feeling just totally numb. And I can still remember that feeling. And then there was just this distinct voice in my head, and it was this little boy saying, "You can do this, Mum. You can do it." And that was Luke. And so we did. His dad, myself, his 2 older brothers, his younger sister, grandparents, aunties, uncles, cousins, incredible friends. Somehow we did it, and we managed to send him off with a fitting funeral for a most amazing 21-year-old. And then it's like, well, what do we do now? So you've got through that huge week leading up to the funeral. We coped with the funeral somehow. We had everybody around us. We had letters and cards and so much support. But still, you've got to do it yourself somehow. How can you live a life that's totally foreign to you in every way possible? As I said, it's life before and life after. And this is the life you just don't want. Somehow you'd sort of take really tiny baby steps. It felt like it was, at that stage, you'd take 1 step forward and 1 step back, and you were just treading water. Then it'd be like 1 step forward, maybe 3/4 of a step back. And gradually things would start to have some sort of light, and you'd see maybe light at the end of the tunnel somehow. Then maybe there was 1 step forward, maybe just half a step back. Somehow deep within, there's some sort of will to survive, and I think that was still there, and somehow with your family support, your friends' support, you do it. It was around this time that we were led into support after suicide by a very close friend and a very dear friend who did some research and found out about this organisation, Support After Suicide. And for me personally, I don't know where I'd be without that. That was a huge thing for me, to find that there were other people who actually knew about suicide, that it was actually, to find that there were people who understood about suicide was all new to me, because you just think it's something that happens to other people. Somehow we didn't just survive. Somehow over those years we managed to create meaning in our lives again. We had one son who was preparing for a marriage. So somehow we had that wedding. Then about 1.5 years later, our other son married, and we had that wedding, and we had joy. It's not joy on its own though. There's always the pain. The pain never goes away. So the pain is part of the joy. And after a while you start to realise that that's the way it is. But the pain, while it's there, as time goes on, it doesn't detract from the joy. So you can have the joy and you can have the pain. It's like a dual-edged sword, I suppose. And that's the way I often describe things. I guess it gives a huge depth to your feeling about anything, is to have that pain and to have that joy at the same time. people thought that having grandchildren would be a great thing for me, and it has been. But at the time, in those early days, whilst the one grandson and then not long after a granddaughter and then more grandchildren arrived, but there was always that that guilt. So I'd watch my daughter-in-laws with their children and think, what beautiful mothers they are. Well, I can't have been like that. I must not have done that. I couldn't even remember I couldn't recreate the feeling I had for my children when they were babies, and I just felt guilt all the time that I must have not shown any love for my children. That was my overwhelming feeling for years. And then just gradually that feeling has dissipated, and I guess it's just the overwhelming joy of those grandchildren. We now have 9, and that, in a way, I think that's what my boys wanted to do. They wanted to recreate families of their own, and they've done that. And I think that's been part of their journey, has been that. And one has 5 children and one has 4 children. I think that's significant because that's their journey. And those 9 grandchildren have brought enormous joy to our family. So, joy can return, which is hard to believe. I never would have believed that would happen. But it has, and with the joy is the meaning in our lives again, and we've had that. We've recreated that. But it's still, you still have days and times when the grief is really strong again and the pain is deep. And then there's things in your life that are always going to trigger that. There's things with those 9 grandchildren. As those grandchildren grow older, they question now, well, what happened to this Luke that you talk about? So how did that happen? So once again, you have to be able to explain suicide to a 12-year-old. And how you do that is tricky, and you need support again. Once again, that takes me back to support after suicide, and that has been a backbone for me. That is like somewhere that I know we can always come back to find information and to get assistance and support, and that is what has been vital to our growth as a family. And our children have reconnected at different times for really valid, strong reasons. And, they've coped in their own way, but then they've had a need. Our daughter had a strong need for support after suicide, and that would have been 8 or 9 years after Luke died. And I was just so grateful that was here for her. So we've always been able to access the support here. So I'm so thankful and grateful. And even to be able to say that I'm thankful and grateful in life again is, and to have that feeling of gratitude and the feeling that we are lucky people. It struck me one day and I thought, wow, where did that come from? How could I ever think that we'd have any feeling of being lucky? But I do. I do have that feeling of gratitude and a feeling that our lives has great meaning. And I also have that feeling that Luke should still be part of that, and I'll never lose that feeling. I still think he should be here, but in a way, I guess I have to accept that it was his decision for whatever reason at his age, at his stage, that took him. And yeah, I think it's just somehow that acceptance that it is the way it is. That's what we've had to come to terms with. And how we go on and where life takes us from here is really hard to know. But I think it's just somehow that acceptance is restoring. It's not acceptance as in you totally accept it was the thing to happen and that it was the way it had to be. It's just somehow that acceptance that it is the way it is, and we'll never understand or truly know, and we'll never understand or truly know what was in Luke's heart and in his mind, and we'll never truly understand or know the depth of mental illness and what it does to people. And when you think of the contrast of the person we thought we knew and the person that did what he did, that's the key to the depth that mental illness takes people to. So we lost our son. Our other kids lost their brother. We lost my mum, and she lost a grandson. People lost their nephew. It's just, and so many kids lost a really good mate. But it was his somehow. For some reason, it was his decision, and it is what it is.